The night air in Miami carried a salty breeze as I stood on the balcony of my villa, watching the waves crash against the shore. Owning this place had been a dream I worked my entire life for. Countless overtime shifts, sleepless nights finishing projects, and sacrifices most people couldn't even imagine. Every piece of furniture, every corner of this villa, held the story of my blood, sweat, and tears. My name is Samantha Carter, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that nothing is ever handed to you. I wasn't born into luxury. I clawed my way up, from working as a waitress in a small Texas diner to becoming the CEO of my own real estate firm. This villa wasn't just a house. It was my sanctuary, my hard-earned reward. But peace has a way of attracting envy. That envy came in the form of my younger sister, Vanessa. She had always been the reckless one, the type to chase thrills, jump from one failed relationship to another, and live on borrowed money. We had grown up in the same house, with the same struggles, but while I turned hardship into fuel, Vanessa turned it into excuses. She was always looking for shortcuts, always convinced the world owed her something. I hadn't spoken to her in months. The last time we talked, she demanded I share my wealth with her because families should benefit together. I told her the truth, that I owed her nothing, especially when she had never lifted a finger to help herself. She hung up on me that day, her voice dripping with venom. So imagine my shock when, on a quiet Friday evening, I heard loud laughter and music blasting from my driveway. I peeked through the curtains and froze. There she was, Vanessa, dressed like she owned the world, flanked by a group of her loud, drunk friends. Without even knocking, she pushed open my gate, strutted up the path, and waltzed right into my villa as if it were her personal nightclub. I clenched my fists. "Vanessa!" I barked, storming into the living room. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She turned, smirking, a glass of champagne already in her hand, one of my best bottles, I noticed. "Relax, sis," she drawled. "We just wanted to have some fun. You've got this giant villa all to yourself. Don't be so selfish." Her friends, half of whom I didn't even recognize, were sprawled across my white leather couches, kicking off their shoes, dropping crumbs on the carpet, snapping selfies as if they were at some Hollywood after-party. Something inside me snapped. This wasn't just disrespect. This was invasion. I walked up to Vanessa, my voice low but laced with fury. "Get out, now, all of you." But she just laughed in my face. "Oh, come on, Samantha. Don't act like you're some queen of the world. You got lucky with money, that's all. Maybe if you shared a little more, you'd have real family around you instead of an empty house." The audacity, the woman who never paid her own bills, who borrowed money and never returned it, who lived off the generosity of others, standing in my house, lecturing me. My jaw tightened, but I didn't shout. I didn't beg. Instead, I smiled. Because in that moment, I decided if Vanessa thought she could barge into my life and disrespect everything I had built, she was going to learn a lesson she'd never forget, and I was going to make sure of it. They thought my silence was weakness. That was their first mistake. After that night, I didn't go upstairs and scream. I didn't smash champagne glasses or call the police on the spot. I walked back to my study, closed the door behind me, and brewed the strongest coffee I owned. The villa hummed around me, the expensive tiles, the art on the walls, the things I'd worked hard to buy, and every one of those objects felt like evidence of a life I had earned. Vanessa and her friends had walked through that life like moths at a bonfire, impatient to burn and take what they could before anyone noticed. I switched on the little security monitor I kept tucked away in a drawer, the one I'd installed after a break-in 5 years earlier. I fed its screen to my laptop and scrolled through the live feed. There they were, Vanessa, flopped on the chaise, her shoes kicked off, her friend Marco filming a boozy TikTok while someone else knocked back a second glass of my best tequila. They were loud, sloppy, and careless, the kind of behavior that always makes mistakes feel inevitable. If you want a person to reveal their worst self, invite them to a place that belongs to you and give them the freedom to act. They'll supply the proof. First thing Saturday, I called my attorney, not to sue, not yet, but to ask what my legal options were if people trespassed or stole from me. He gave me a bored list of explanations that read like small print. It was useful to hear the formalities. Documentation mattered. Evidence mattered. Timing mattered. The law would help me if I didn't hand them a chance to claim victimhood. So I did what the professional told me. I documented. While Vanessa and her friends slept off margaritas, I moved through the house with the precise patience of someone cataloging a crime scene. I took photographs of footprints on the white rug, of a handprint on the side of my antique console, of a wine ring and a lipstick smear on the chaise I loved. I logged serial numbers from my electronics and snapped pictures of the empty bottles in the trash. I didn't feel petty doing it. I felt smart, meticulous. I knew narrative is built from facts, and I intended to let the facts speak loud and naked when the time came. Then I did something cruel only in the clever way the world rewards. I let them believe their invasion had been forgotten. I made tea for Vanessa in the morning, and I nursed her hangover like a saint might nurse a sinner. I sat by her like a patient, sympathetic sister while she complained about work and money and the world. I listened, nodded, and kept my face soft enough that she thought she'd won me back. Later, when the friends staggered out and the music died, I texted a neutral message to my mother, all settled. They're gone for now. It was a lie in tone and a truth in content. Vanessa had left for a boutique brunch, but she'd be back with more friends tonight. That was fine. My plan needed repeats. Over the next week, I wove small threads, friendly calls, half offers of help, an awkward lunch where I pretended to forgive and she pretended she'd changed. Publicly, I was the big sister who cared. Privately, I was assembling a quiet army. I called the property manager and changed the guest parking authorization. I asked the villa's concierge to start logging visitors. I set 2 more cameras, discreet, wide-angle, behind potted palms and behind a recessed shelf in the living room. If they planned to behave like kings in a borrowed palace, I wanted the kingdom recorded. The more they swaggered, the more obvious their seams became. Vanessa's friends treated my house like the ultimate backdrop. Drunk photos, stolen jewelry jokes, a tacky Instagram story where they danced on my marble countertop. One of them, Marco, made a mistake on the 3rd night. He tried to pocket a small silver figurine from my mantelpiece, laughing like it was a prank. Another guest caught him and said, "Yo, don't take it, man. That's nice." Marco shoved the object into his jacket anyway. The camera watched him. When you watch enough people acting without consequence, patterns emerge. They texted each other plans in the open. They posted boomerang clips with geotags. They bragged about living luxe at my expense. And crucially, they bragged in ways that left trails, digital breadcrumbs that even the most careless thief forgets to scrub. I didn't confront them in the beginning because confrontation is messy and impulsive. I preferred the long, slow unspooling. So I fed them a little bait. I left a new bottle of champagne on ice with a note. "For you, enjoy." I left the key to the upstairs guest suite on the coffee table in full view. I set a playlist with an inside joke they loved. I could picture them arriving, thinking I was the benevolent host. In truth, I was a spider, and the web had 3 exits already wired. 2 nights later, I called a friend who ran a small neighborhood news blog. She owed me favors from a charity gala I'd hosted. I didn't leak any juicy accusations yet. I simply asked if she'd be willing to keep an eye out for rowdy groups at the villa. She loved gossip and promised to text if anything notable happened. The echo of that intent, knowing someone might be watching, changes behavior in subtle ways. People perform differently when they suspect an audience. The best part of my little campaign was watching Vanessa self-destruct in my living room on stage. At a midnight party, she posed for a video on my staircase and announced to her followers that Samantha finally loosened up and let us party. The words were stupidly triumphant. The video was stamped with time and place. I saved it. 2 nights later, I used the footage the way a chess player uses a king sacrifice. I called the local boutique owner who'd been feeding Vanessa credit on a tab. I didn't threaten. I simply asked a neutral question. Did they remember that woman? The one who'd bought a $100 dress and paid later? The owner answered with the name and the tab details. I printed the receipts. Then I called the pawn shop 2 blocks away and inquired, carefully, if they'd seen the little figurine. The owner, embarrassed, admitted they had. Yeah, some kid sold it this morning. Small silver angel. Said he found it at a house party. I got his name. Evidence works like gravity. The more pieces you have, the harder it is for someone to float away from the weight of the truth. Finally, when the party reached a kind of ugly crescendo, drunk laughter, someone slumped in my favorite chair, a string of unflattering karaoke, Marco reached into his jacket and my camera's view caught the gleam in his hand. I didn't storm in then. I let the party keep roaring, and I called the one person in my life I knew would move with steady force. Detective Harper, a contact I'd made through charity work. I hadn't wanted police to be my first act. That felt petty and theatrical. But when theft was visible and ongoing, I knew law would be a clean knife. Harper arrived unannounced with a polite official manner that made the room still. She asked me if I wished to press charges. I looked at the drunken faces, at the scattered trash, at the silver angel someone's fingers had gripped like an afterthought. I remembered the way Vanessa had looked at me 2 nights ago, entitled and uninterested in everything I'd spent my life building. My hands were steady. Yes, I said. And I want it documented. Every piece. The arrests weren't violent. Marco and 2 others were detained for possession of stolen property. Vanessa's face when she realized the officers weren't going to be easily placated was a better thing than any revenge I had mentally scripted. She went white. Her friends muttered and tried to charm their way out of cuffs. It didn't work. The cameras had done what I'd hoped. They had recorded behavior that no one could credibly deny. Word spread because the small town loves spectacle. Eyes that had been politely averted now trained on my address. People said I was ruthless. Some people said I was brave. My mother called, voice trembling, saying she'd never thought it would end like this. I told her the truth. She came into my house like a conqueror. I chose to defend what's mine. Revenge, I had learned by then, feels less like victory and more like restoration when it's done with care. The next steps were tedious. Police statements, press calls, the neighbor who volunteered a shaky video from across the street, but they were necessary. And while Vanessa sat in the local precinct, giving a statement that had none of her usual self-assurance, I walked back through my villa with my keys in my palm and the certain knowledge that this battle had been planned like a chess match. Measured, patient, and finally decisive. They had barged in thinking they owned the night. By sunrise, the night had remembered whose house it was. The villa was quiet again, unnervingly so. After the police cars had rolled away, their red and blue lights flickering against the palm trees like some kind of grotesque festival, silence returned. But silence doesn't always mean peace. I sat in the kitchen with a glass of water, the weight of what had just happened pressing against my chest like a physical hand. Vanessa was no longer in the house, but her shadow lingered in every room. The ruined rug, the smudged counters, the faint stale smell of liquor. All of it was a reminder of her invasion. Most people would have stopped there. My friends texted congratulations. Finally, you put her in her place. They thought the arrest was the end of the story. But I knew Vanessa. I knew humiliation would only make her more dangerous. She wasn't the type to disappear quietly, and I wasn't about to wait around for her next move. I began with the simplest thing, reputation. In a town like ours, money buys status, but behavior builds or destroys your image. Vanessa had always worked so hard to maintain her facade of class and taste. Instagram posts with rented handbags, dinners photographed but not paid for. Her friends didn't love her. They loved the lifestyle she pretended to own. If that curtain came down, what would be left? Nothing but desperation. So I started to pull at the threads. I compiled everything I had, screenshots of her wild Instagram stories from my villa, copies of her boutique credit debts, pawn shop receipts, and clips from my security cameras. Each file was neat, labeled, time-stamped. A dossier, really. A weapon, but I didn't blast it online. No, that would have been sloppy, too obvious. Revenge isn't about speed, it's about precision. Instead, I sent anonymous envelopes. One to the boutique owner, with Vanessa's drunken video bragging about scoring free designer dresses. Another to her boss, who already looked for reasons to fire her. That one included a photo of Vanessa stumbling barefoot across my marble floor, glass of tequila in hand, captioned from her own social media, "Queen of the Night in Assis's Palace." The last one, though, I saved for the best audience, her so-called friends. I created a burner account and dropped Marco's mugshot into their group chat, alongside a note, "Careful who you trust. Some queens will let you drown to save themselves." The effect was immediate. Screenshots leaked back to me through acquaintances within hours. Her friends turned on her with surgical speed. No one wants to party with the person who might drag you into handcuffs. Vanessa texted me the next day. "You think you're clever. You think you've won. This isn't over." I smiled at the screen. That was the Vanessa I knew. Proud, arrogant, too angry to realize she was already unraveling. Still, I wasn't satisfied. I needed her to feel what I had felt. That sense of violation, of being treated like an afterthought in your own home. Arrests and rumors weren't enough. No, I needed her to understand that every door she kicked open could slam shut on her fingers. So, I set the stage. I invited her over. Yes, after everything, I texted her, "Let's talk, just us. I don't want this to spiral further." She arrived 2 days later, looking more brittle than I'd ever seen her. No entourage this time, just Vanessa in oversized sunglasses and an expensive blouse she probably couldn't afford. She walked into the villa like it still belonged to her, but her shoulders were tight, her eyes scanning for traps. "Nice place," she muttered, voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's mine," I said simply, and watched her flinch. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the very same table where she'd once sprawled with her friends, laughing like queens of the world. The irony wasn't lost on me. She started talking fast, like she always did when she was cornered. How it wasn't her fault. How her friends had pushed her. How she hadn't meant to disrespect me. Every word was a performance, rehearsed, hollow. I let her talk until the excuses ran out. Then I slid a folder across the table. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "Every lie. Every theft. Every post. Every receipt. I've made copies. If I wanted, I could send this to anyone. Your boss, your landlord, every client you've ever bragged to." Her hands shook as she opened it. The photographs, the screenshots, the mugshots, they stared back at her like ghosts. "You wouldn't?" she whispered. "Oh, I would," I said softly. "And I will, unless you learn." Her eyes narrowed, fear giving way to fury. "You're bluffing. You're just trying to scare me." "Maybe," I replied, leaning back, "but you'll never know which version of me you're dealing with until it's too late." For the first time in years, Vanessa had nothing to say. She snapped the folder shut, shoved it back toward me, and stormed out of the villa. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the hall like thunder. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that I had already uploaded everything to a secure cloud. Whether she walked away or came back swinging, I was ready. That night, as I sat by the window looking out at the quiet street, I thought about the strange thing revenge does to you. It doesn't soothe you. It doesn't heal you. It sharpens you. It makes you hungry. And as much as I told myself I was protecting my home, my life, my peace, deep down, I knew the truth. I wanted her to fall. Not just stumble. Not just get arrested and recover. I wanted her empire of illusions to collapse so thoroughly that she would never rise again. And the best part? She was already building the fire herself. They didn't go down without a fight. That was the first thing I learned as Chapter 4 began to write itself across our lives. People who have spent their days taking and manipulating rarely leave the table quietly when someone finally calls their bluff. 2 mornings after our last conversation, my inbox pinged with something I hadn't expected, an official-looking letter from Vanessa's attorney. She was suing me for emotional distress and defamation, claiming I'd orchestrated a smear campaign to ruin her reputation. The letter was polite, all legal cadence and thin menace, but the meaning was clear. She would make me bleed in courts if I'd made her bleed on my floor. I read it twice, then laughed aloud, sharp and too bright. Suing me? That was bold. It also meant she'd gone to the well and found a lawyer willing to press paper. I slid the letter into the folder I kept for these things and called Mr. Reed, my own attorney, who smelled like old oak and straightforward answers. She's trying to scare you, he said after I read the letter to him. Paperwork is threatening, but the documents you have, timestamps, receipts, vendor lists, the pawn shop's admission, all of that is a record. If she sues, you counter. Sometimes the best defense is letting the law unwrap the truth. He tapped his pen. Steady. Don't play at her level. Let the professionals do what they do. So I let the professionals move, but behind the curtain I sharpened other tools. The lawsuit was theater. Courtrooms are slow. I wanted momentum now. I wanted the world to see her unravel further, not because I gossiped, but because the facts would compel people to act. Vanessa, cornered, doubled down on petty vengeance. She called neighbors with dramatized accounts of how I'd set her up. She left angry voicemails for mutual friends. She tried to bait me on social media, posting filtered photos of champagne glasses and cryptic captions about betrayal. For someone used to cultivating attention, silence is the real insult, and I gave her silence like a mirror. She raged at it. Her next move was more telling. She went to the boutique where she'd once charged dresses on tab and demanded they reinstate her account. They refused. She stormed into her office and threw a fit until HR threatened termination for unprofessional behavior. She tried to get her friends to rally with her, but most of them were busy apologizing to the boutique owner and quietly removing tags where they'd been seen in my house. Panic makes for poor allies. Then the desperation accelerated. One night I received a text from Marco's number, short, frantic. She's going to take what's left, it read. I called Detective Harper immediately. She answered in 3 rings. Keep your doors locked, she said bluntly. We'll increase patrols. That was the night someone tried to sneak into my guest suite. I had been up late, reviewing invoices. True revenge is paperwork, as my father used to joke, and the house settled with familiar creak and sigh. Around 2 a.m., my sensor pinged the private security line. A shadow crossed the hallway camera. I didn't confront it. I called Harper and let the quiet professionals move. They caught a figure with a hoodie in my ivy. It wasn't Vanessa herself. It was a friend, one of the people who'd partied in my living room. He was carrying a tote bag and a guilty swagger. Under the porch light, the police found a small silver angel, my figurine bent and grimy. The guy stuttered out something about helping Vanessa get her things, but the law does not care for excuses much when evidence is stacked. I felt no pleasure in seeing someone cuffed outside my house, but the message was clean. If you take what isn't yours, others will notice, and consequences follow. Vanessa's panic moved into a new, dangerous phase. She started spreading false reports, telling people I'd called the police on imaginary trespassers when in truth it was her crew who had trampled my floors. She accused me of playing games because I'd had the temerity to secure the villa against intrusion. That should have been laughable, but public opinion can be fickle. Sometimes it bends toward the dramatic liar if the liar is more theatrical. I decided to change the frame of the narrative to one she couldn't pretend inside. I contacted the pawn shop owner who'd sold me back the Silver Angel's paperwork. His name was Jorge, and he'd been embarrassed when I'd called. He was a small man with clean hands and a guilty conscience that, when prodded, turned helpful. I asked him to let me know in confidence if anyone tried to hawk my things. He agreed, uneasy and afraid, but willing. Then I staged a little trap that felt mean but fair. I moved a few small, non-precious but sentimental items into a shallow box in the guest suite. Items that could be pawnable, that would mean something if seen in someone else's hands. The figurine had been returned, but thieves covet anything that isn't nailed down. I made sure the area was visible to the hidden camera, then let the rest be natural. A week later, Marco tried again. This time he came at dusk, with a different friend, a backpack, and that same dumb bravado. He thought he was clever. He didn't know the pawn shop now had my number on file, or that Jorge would text me the second someone tried to sell the items. He didn't see the newsroom of evidence I had lined up: texts, receipts, geotags, his own boastful boomerangs. He didn't read the room properly. By the time he reached the counter at the pawn shop, Jorge was ready. "You sure this is yours?" Jorge asked, and Marco's confidence slashed into guilt like a knife in butter. The shop called the number I'd given them. 2 officers arrived within minutes. Marco sat on the stoop, face hollow. When he called Vanessa, she didn't answer. Panic makes people foolish. She'd made too many enemies, and too many of them were now people who knew how to tie a knot. She texted threats. She begged for appearances of solidarity among her dwindling friends. No one came. She called me at 3 a.m., voice raw. "You made me look like a criminal," she said. "You ruined my life." Her cry was not one I'd wanted to hear. It reminded me of the little girl who used to sneak cookies from the jar and blame the dog. But the woman who'd waltzed into my villa with friends and poached my life had been replaced by someone clawing at scraps. "You chose this," I said, voice low and flat. "You could have left with dignity. You chose not to." The words landed like a verdict. Because I didn't want to destroy her for the sake of cruelty, there were lines I considered sacred. I didn't smash her car. I didn't call her employer to spread lies. I didn't post her private struggles to the internet for clicks. The difference between me and her was the architecture of intent. I aimed to make consequences, legal, social, reputational, do the heavy lifting. Not petty cruelty. That mattered to me. Still, watching Vanessa unravel was its own education. She had made choices that only led to isolation. The party girls turned away. The boutique owner gave her a curt notice. "Your account is closed." Her landlord tightened terms. Small doors closed. The world receded until the only person left who might stand with her was the echo in an empty room. At last, she came to my door. No lawyer, no entourage, only a cheap hoodie and eyes rimmed with red. She stood under my porch light as if judged and found wanting. I opened the door not with gloating, but with a steadiness that felt older than anger. "You can stay the night," I told her. "You can sleep in the guest room." It surprised her. Surprised me more. "Why?" she whispered. "Because fighting a war from the outside is exhausting," I said. "And because sometimes people need to recognize the scale of what they've broken. I don't want you to rot on the streets. I want you to learn." She stared, stunned, and let herself be guided to the bed. The irony was delicious. She'd barged in like a conqueror and now slept under my roof, small and startled. I didn't forgive her then. I didn't offer absolution. I offered a roof and a chance to rebuild from a smaller place, where humility might be the only currency left to trade. Revenge, I told myself, had never been about watching someone suffer for the sake of suffering. It was about setting boundaries, reinforcing consequences, and letting the law and the truth do their work. That night, as she slept fitfully, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a letter to the boutique, the landlord, the pawn shop, and a few close friends who'd asked what had really happened. I kept my tone factual. I let the evidence speak where gossip had not. When the documents hit inboxes, the narrative shifted again. No melodrama, only records. Everything I wanted to be known was now verifiable and, more importantly, impossible to deny. In the morning, Vanessa woke up to a world that had narrowed. The calls were fewer. The doors closed tighter. The consequences of her choices had become palpable. I had not crushed her. The world had given her the consequences she'd earned. And I had, finally, restored my villa's peace. Quiet not because her noise had been silenced by force, but because the people who enabled her behavior were gone. The house felt like home again, a space I'd built and defended, not a stage for other people's entitlement. The lesson had been taught, not with cruelty, but with relentless precision. The days after Vanessa's collapse in my guest room carried a quiet that was almost eerie. For the first time in months, the villa hummed with its own kind of peace, as though the walls themselves were exhaling relief. But peace is rarely permanent when someone like Vanessa is involved. She woke that morning pale and puffy-eyed, and for a brief moment, I thought she might thank me for letting her stay. Instead, her first words were, Do you have coffee? Not gratitude. Not apology. Just entitlement, stripped of its finery but still stubbornly alive. I made her coffee anyway, because part of me wanted to watch her squirm in a house that now bore evidence of her failure. She sipped in silence, refusing to meet my eyes, and when she finally spoke, her voice was flat. Everyone's turned their back on me. Everyone turned away because you used them, I said evenly. And when you couldn't use them anymore, you tried to steal from me. You made your choices. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Maybe she knew she'd run out of words. Maybe the fight had burned itself out. But I wasn't naive enough to believe silence equaled surrender. 2 days later, the first message came through, a group text from one of her old party friends, warning me that Vanessa was spinning a new story, this time about how I had manipulated the system to frame her. She was playing the victim card now, dragging sympathy from anyone still gullible enough to listen. I let her talk. I let the lies swirl. But while she wasted her breath on fiction, I worked on something real. Mr. Reed, my attorney, had advised me to finalize the countersuit papers. I didn't relish the thought of dragging family through court, but Vanessa had opened that door. I was simply walking through it with documentation in hand. One night, as the papers were being processed, I found her standing on the back patio, staring at the pool. The reflection of the water lit her face, making her look younger, almost innocent. Almost. "You hate me," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned against the doorway, folding my arms. "I don't hate you, Vanessa. Hate would mean I cared enough to let you take up space in my heart. What I feel for you is disappointment and resolve. You tried to take what wasn't yours. You tried to break me. That's not hate, it's consequences." For the first time, I saw tears she didn't bother to hide. "I just wanted what you had," she admitted, choking on the words. "The house, the security, the respect. People look at you and they admire you. They've never looked at me that way." Her confession struck me like a sudden wind. This wasn't about the villa. It had never been. It was about her emptiness, her aching need to be seen as more than she was. She thought crashing into my life with her entourage would give her the illusion of power. She thought stealing pieces of my world would make her whole. But broken glass doesn't turn into diamonds just because you steal it. I let her words hang in the air before I spoke. "Vanessa, you can't build your worth out of what belongs to other people. That's not admiration. That's theft." The conversation ended there, with silence and the sound of water rippling against tile. But something in her posture told me the lesson wasn't fully absorbed. People like Vanessa rarely accept truth in one sitting. The following week, the lawsuit hearing was scheduled. She walked into the courthouse dressed in borrowed dignity. Cheap blazer, hair pulled into a tight bun, as if neatness could erase her record. But when the judge read through the stack of evidence, her facade cracked. Photos, receipts, witness accounts. Surveillance clips. One by one, each piece dismantled the web of lies she'd spun. Her attorney tried to argue, but even he looked exhausted by her. When the ruling came down, it was decisive. Her claims dismissed, my counters accepted. She owed damages, fees, and, perhaps the harshest blow, an official statement of apology. That night, she sat across from me in the kitchen, the villa quiet around us. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "You really won," she said, voice hollow. I shook my head. "No, Vanessa, I didn't win. I just refused to lose." Her eyes flickered with something, anger, shame, maybe even respect. But she said nothing more. And as she retreated to the guest room, I realized something. Revenge hadn't been about crushing her under my heel. It had been about reclaiming my space, my dignity, and my peace. The lesson had been taught. Whether she absorbed it or not was no longer my responsibility. The morning after the court ruling, the villa felt different. Lighter, quieter, almost sacred. I woke to sunlight pouring through the tall windows, stretching across the marble floor like a promise. For months, this house had carried the weight of intrusion, betrayal, and chaos. Now, it finally felt like mine again. Vanessa lingered in the guest room longer than I expected. She emerged late, her eyes shadowed and her movements sluggish. For once, she didn't demand anything. No coffee, no sympathy, no attention. She simply sat at the table staring at her hands. "I can't go back to the way things were," she murmured. "No," I agreed. "You can't!" She glanced up at me then, and for a brief moment, I almost saw the girl she used to be. Wild, stubborn, full of potential that she squandered chasing illusions of grandeur. But then it faded, replaced by the hardened edges of someone who'd burned too many bridges. In the days that followed, she packed quietly. No tantrums, no drama, just quiet acceptance. The apology letter, drafted by her attorney and signed under court order, arrived in my inbox. Reading it was surreal, her words, forced onto paper, admitting to lies, theft, and trespassing. It wasn't heartfelt, but it was final. The villa had witnessed her downfall, but it would also witness her exit. On her last morning, she stood by the door with a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She looked at me, eyes searching for something. Mercy, maybe, or forgiveness. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said softly. I studied her, weighing the heaviness of everything she'd done. "Vanessa, every step of the way, you chose the path you took. Barging in here with your friends, stealing from me, lying about me, trying to turn people against me. None of that was an accident. This is where those choices led." Her chin trembled, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded, then walked out. The door closed behind her with a quiet finality. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the patio, staring at the stars. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't angry. I wasn't plotting or defending or waiting for the next attack. I was simply free. Revenge, I realized, isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's patience. Sometimes it's precision. Sometimes it's letting the world, and the law, do the work for you. The best revenge is reclaiming your peace, standing tall while the people who tried to destroy you collapse under the weight of their own actions. Vanessa had tried to barge into my life, my home, and my identity. But in the end, all she managed to do was expose herself for who she truly was. And me? I walked away stronger, wiser, and unshakably certain of one thing. No one will ever take my peace from me again,